everyone. Welcome back to Decoding Dragons, where we break down all things House the Dragon. We're your hosts, Liza and Michelle, and we're spilling all the royalty and breaking down the fire for every episode.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about what happened in House of the Dragon Season 1, Episode 4, named King of the Narrow Sea. What did you think of the episode?
I had so many thoughts about this episode. I have been struggling to get them in order. So my first one is that we did get the scene where Daemon lays his the crown from the stepstones at basically at Viserys' feet, and we see Grand McTavish there also, and he survives the encounter. I was a little worried that you point a sword at someone in Game of Thrones, things can go one of two ways, but Grand McTavish survived, and Daemon is now, King of the Narrow Sea. He lays his crown at Viserys' feet, and Viserys is like, I accept you back, brother. All the cool stuff. And then we still haven't gotten the wedding, but we did get the announcement with Laenor. So Viserys basically told Rhaenyra, okay, you're gonna marry him. That's how it's gonna happen. And she didn't have much say in the matter, but it'll probably work out as much as anything in Game of Thrones ever works out for anyone. So, but
arranged marriages typically go pretty well.
Yeah, right. we see how well Daemon's is going with his Lady in the Veil, right? We see how well.
Right.
And then this was definitely like a peace-moving episode for sure. It was 100% impactful, and I think all the characters made very telling decisions in this episode throughout. There is one person that we got to meet that I really wanted to point out. So, we got to see Bloody Ben Blackwood. So as soon as he announced his house, I knew exactly who he was. But for those who have read Fire and Blood, his name is Benjicott Blackwood, and he ends up being like a huge piece in like the armies in the future, like that we're gonna get in House of the Dragon, like the future parts, the Dance of the Dragons. He is just badass. So, and it's fun seeing him in this situation where, he basically draws his sword on this like much older, taller guy, and he wins. And I'm just like, this is a good introduction scene, because basically the way they describe him is he's a little bit shy, but you put him in battle armor, he's a totally different person. So I'm just like, this is a really good introduction to Ben for everybody. So I thought that was super cool.
They did that pretty well then, because he was exactly that. He was a little shy, and then the guy wouldn't stop talking shit, and he was like, show up, let's go.
Right? He's like, I'm going to meet you. We will throw hands, right? So, but yeah, I very much enjoyed it. And we got to see Storm's End. What did you think of Storm's End?
Yeah, so that was something really cool. We've never actually been inside the castle, so we got to see inside Storm's End. And then she was surrounded by, I think it was Borman Baratheon, the one who swore fealty to her at the beginning. And then Kristen Cole was with her, obviously. But we got to see a lot of sigils. We got to see the twins. And the person who was talking to her, the older guy, was actually a Dondarrion, which we would know from Beric Dondarrion with the flaming sword from Game of Thrones. So that was pretty cool. And I found out that Kristen Cole is actually from that area. So her kind of turning that person down is actually going to be a little thing that happens later. It's going to be an impactful moment for later, apparently.
So yeah, you see House Dondarrion several times, and every time I hear the name, I immediately think of like scene Beyond the Wall with the flaming sword. It's just, I immediately think about that. But yeah, so Kristen Cole, I think he is from that area. I know that they mentioned earlier he's Dornish. So he's definitely from, I think, somewhere around the Dornish Marches. They're talking about how beautiful it is down there. And Kristen Cole got a lot of screen time in this episode, and we definitely need to find a way to kind of get into that a little bit, but maybe we'll get into that in like the fire section with where we get into our spoiler talk, like the real spoiler talk and the lore breakdown.
Yes.
So we'll definitely get into that. But yeah, it was just a very, I think they nailed the tone for this episode, and I think the tone they were going for was uncomfortable. The whole thing I was thinking the entire episode was, uh-oh, this is bad. Bad decisions everywhere, all around. So, yeah, that's how I felt. I felt like, damn.
I agree with you. It was definitely a cringeful episode. I usually don't have an issue with stuff like that, but this one I was definitely cringing. And you're right, the whole episode was surrounded by bad decisions. So the entire time it was like, no, maybe don't do that. Maybe no, maybe not. Maybe think about that. That was like the entire episode.
I know. And it was just like, please, if you're gonna do it, don't make us watch. We don't want to know what's happening here. We don't want to know. But I think a lot of the characters made like super telling decisions when it comes to like their long game motives. So that's actually something that I want to talk to you about in like our blood section, where we really break down like the characters in the show and why they're doing what they're doing as we're kind of watching all these events transpire on screen. So let's get into the tea, because there was a lot of it in this episode. All right, so my first question, because Rhaenyra is coming into her own, I suppose you could say, but she's also making a lot of very questionable decisions as someone who wants to be named heir in this episode. So what are your thoughts on Rhaenyra right now?
Oh gosh, so I would love to say she's young and naive and immature, but I could have said that on episode 1. Some of these decisions she's making are just dumb. She's not being very smart. I'm not mad at her at all. I definitely think she has a lot more growing to do. Something that we kind of talked about offline was she doesn't really understand what she's doing. She doesn't understand the impact of some of her tone. Even if the words are correct, then the tone isn't necessarily there. And I think that was a really important part of what Daemon was trying to show her by going around Flea Bottom, and he's kind of making the point you have to care what these people think about you, because she just doesn't. She doesn't care about the play. She doesn't care about what people think about her. She thinks that they're below her. And you're really starting to see her grow into this kind of not nice character who is just has too much of an ego.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk about the irony of Daemon being the one to tell her to care about what the city thinks about her. First and foremost, the irony was strong. It does show his growth as a character, that he's the one basically telling her, you need to care what these people think about you. The small folk are what keep you king and queen. Like, if the people hate you, you don't stay on the throne for long. So that was, the irony there was super, super strong. But also, there's no good people in this show. Like, there are no heroes. Everyone here is a morally gray character making very questionable choices for very questionable reasons, and it gives the audience like a chance to decide whose questionable choices they agree with more, and then pick the side they want to be on. Yeah. But I agree. I think we're starting to see the major differences, in my opinion, between on-screen Rhaenyra versus on-screen Daenerys. And because Dany, every decision she made was trying to get her closer to the throne. She knew how serious it was, and even if she didn't agree with something, she would find a fairly political way to tell the person, or she would just kill them and burn them. It depends on which season of Dany we're talking about.
Correct.
But with Rhaenyra, you can see like she will say a lot of rude things without really thinking about the fact she could be making enemies for her future self. And also, I think her personal decisions in this episode shows a lot about her character, because we got to see kind of what happened with her and Daemon in the brothel, which is it was bad. I think first of all, I think the the leading into the brothel, those scenes were a little gratuitous in my personal opinion. But it definitely gets the idea across that, you know, Daemon's comfortable here. This is new for Rhaenyra. It's the perfect situation for him to try to kind of like move in romantically, physically, however you want to kind of put that. And then secondly, like her going straight back and making Kristen Cole basically her rebound was like, it is a bad character choice. That was unkind, to put it lightly. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's interesting because Daemon is showing her a part of the world that she would never otherwise have known about. And it's something that he has experience with. Yeah. And, he, like you said, he's completely comfortable, and she didn't look uncomfortable. She just looked kind of fascinated. She's taking it all in and accepting whatever's going on. And then the cringe part started, you know, like, that's the part of the wheel, instead of the Game of Thrones wheel that needs to be broken, I think the Targaryen ancestral wheel should be broken.
Just break the wheel. No puns intended. Just smash it, right?
Just break that one.
Agreed.
Don't worry about the Iron Throne. Just break that wheel.
I know. And I thought it was super important, like a really important note was the fact he took her hat off at like the last possible moment. He's like, everyone has to know this is Rhaenyra, because he's playing a game. He's like, everybody needs to know you were here with me. Everybody needs to know what we were doing, because I want want that fucking throne, and the only way I'm gonna get it at this point is if I'm next to you. So he was definitely playing a smart game. Maesters and Septons basically wrote Fire and Blood, so we have no first-hand account of what happened. But they do basically, in like the most polite terms I can put it in, insinuate that Daemon and Rhaenyra had something going on, and he was trying to teach her the feminine arts of of seduction. He was trying to teach her the arts of seduction. Assume what you will from there. So everyone never really knows if they actually did it or if they just messed around. But in the show, it seems that Daemon's entire goal is, okay, if I sully your name, then I'll be the one to like marry you, and then I'm as close as I'm going to get to the throne at this point. So you can kind of see why he's doing it, but I think that her like straight just jumping right onto Kristen Cole after that was like a very unkind move, because the scene where they're slowly taking off his Kingsguard armor, I really feel like they like stayed on that as like for a while as a very symbolic reason, because if I remember correctly, I think the Kingsguard take a bunch of vows, right? They vow to, they don't have land, they don't have families, basically.
Yep.
So he was breaking more than one vow in one go, and I just felt so bad for him, because it kind of like the vibe that I got, while it did not seem unconsensual, it didn't seem like he felt comfortable saying no. So it was just so sad and like emotional, I guess, to watch, because of how this leads to like the many dramatic changes in their relationship in the future. It definitely sets the tone for why they have their like extreme falling apart later on, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely seemed kind of obligatory, because like you said, he was kind of scared to say no. And it was, I agree with your words, it was unkind of her to do that. But so the Kingsguard take a vow to be basically chastised the entire time that they're in duty, and they don't take no wife and take no land, and like you said, and he's been in that role now for what, like 4 years at this point, so he's really been in it, and I can see how they can grow as a character together, because he's her protector, but she crossed the line that didn't need to be crossed.
And I think I'm trying to think back to the episode, but I'm pretty sure the last thing he said before it became a little bit not so much talking after that point was don't. And after that, it was just like there was no more talking involved. But it kind of broke my heart a little bit to watch, because Rhaenyra was not thinking about his situation whatsoever. Because she's somewhat protected. No. She's a princess. But Kristen Cole, if they find out what happens, he is not by any means. And I think Alicent says something later that Rhaenyra says it, that if someone basically sullies her honor, it's treason. Or says something about it, or like claims they have sullied her or something. Like, that is just treason. So I was just like, you were not even remotely thinking about what this gets him into. And I mean, it was as consensual as I could imagine it to be in that situation. However, it's just not good for either of them going forward. It was just not a healthy transaction whatsoever. And especially with combined with what happened between Rhaenyra and Daemon. And Viserys finds out, and that might be the one truth Otto told his whole life.
Right.
But he definitely, in this one situation, Otto told Viserys exactly what he heard and exactly what he knew. And he got fired for it, I think. So what did you think about the confrontation between Viserys and Daemon when Viserys found out?
Oh, well, it was powerful. Viserys finally got a backbone. But apparently you don't cross his children. That was the one thing he has a backbone about. I found it interesting that Daemon is obviously playing a game the entire time. Like, we don't know when or what we can trust about Daemon. Obviously, we didn't trust him at the beginning of the episode when he's all like, take me back, brother. And Viserys is like, sure. And we were like, what? What are you up to? Like, what are you doing? And so now his game is he can see that getting close to Rhaenyra is going to get him closer to the throne, like you said. So then I loved when they threw him into the Red Keep, and Viserys wasn't even on the throne. Like, he wasn't exalting his power. He was just like, no, I'm going to walk in behind you, and I don't even have my sword. I'm just bringing the dagger, and I'm going to threaten you. And it was just like, ooh, he does have some balls.
He does have it about him. I think it was definitely more of like a brother to brother than king to prince
for sure
situation. I think they made sure it was personal. And we found out where the dagger's from We found out where it's from. It was Aegon's dagger, and the Song of Ice and Fire is inscribed on the dagger by a fire mage. And I just loved that part where it's like basically the prince who was promised is an issue straight from Aegon Targaryen's line. And I don't know if they ever truly cemented in the show who the prince who was promised is. That is a huge bit of lore, and I think it would take ages to talk about the prince who was promised prophecy. But since the books aren't finished, I think most people are thinking it's Jon. If you think it's someone different, everybody watching, make sure you tell us in the comments, because there's theories that it's Dany and it's the princess who was promised. There's theory that it's Jon, and I think that there is another Targaryen in the Song of Ice and Fire books. I haven't finished the entire Song of Ice and Fire original series, but I've read a Game of Thrones and Fire and Blood, so I am, well versed in what happens in the Dance of Dragons, but not so much in like the canon of the later episodes of Game of Thrones, like book canon wise. So
yeah,
to know that like it's just been cemented from the beginning, and Aegon put it in the dagger to be handed down, and that is actually the dagger that kills the Night King and fulfills the prophecy, is just phenomenal.
In High Valyrian, the translation of the word for prince or princess, it's the same word. So there is no straight translation in a masculine or feminine sense. Like it's mentioned in the original Game of Thrones series as well. So if the inscription says something about a prince or a princess who is promised, you don't know the difference because this word is the same. So it could be anybody.
Yeah, so the situation with Viserys and Daemon, I thought that was like that was a brother to brother, you done fucked up conversation, Yeah. And then the conversation that Viserys has with Otto also kind of goes to show that there is a line you don't cross with Viserys, and that line happens to be Rhaenyra. It's the only thing he puts his foot down about, but when he puts his foot down, he puts it down. So what did you think about how he was communicating with Otto, like their conversation later on?
So their conversation was good. You could definitely see the difference between the conversation with him and Daemon versus him and Otto. It was absolutely like a personal brother to brother thing versus the king to his hand. And he wasn't necessarily trying to be polite, but he was trying to be respectful because he has served loyally and served a couple of other kings. I really like that he kicked his ass out. But I also appreciated the whispers came from the White Worm. We got to see Mysaria again. And that was definitely a Varys callback for sure. Like there's a parallel there for sure. But the conversation between Viserys and Otto, I'm glad that he's kicked out, but I can also see how this is going to perpetuate some issues.
Agreed. And I thought it definitely told a lot about Rhaenyra's character also, that she flipped it on Alicent so fast. When Alicent tried to be like, I'm trying to help you, we didn't have a conversation, trying to figure out what to do, and she immediately went to, who said this about me, basically cut off their tongue,
Yeah.
So she just flipped it so fast, and the second she found out who did it, she gave her father the information and made sure that it was over. Like, you can see that she does think politically, even if it's not in the best direction, but she can influence political decisions. She does know how to play the Game of Thrones. And Otto, maybe the one thing that he ever did that was actually true and wasn't some like, it is self-serving, obviously, to a degree, because, you get Rhaenyra out, Aegon gets in there, Alicent's, the Queen Mother or whatever. So it is definitely 100% still self-serving, and Viserys is 100% aware of that. However, he was giving the information that he got, like that he was just telling what was told to him. And it was so good to see Mysaria again. If I remember correctly, I believe she becomes Mistress of Whispers, like, permanently at a later point in the story. Okay. So it's nice seeing her kind of get basically her hands in the mix, I guess, and kind of like start, dealing in secrets. Because she has a line that kind of alludes to the fact that she's moved on to dealing in secrets now. And
I enjoyed a line that she said something like, I figured out the skin trade won't get me very far. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool line, because it would be technically a skin trade.
Basically, and now she's basically trading secrets, so it's like, she has her spies, and I do appreciate the nod to the little spies that Varys had, and then you kind of see that Mysaria also has them stationed out. Also, Mysaria was involved with Daemon at one point, and her spy was the one to rat him out, because it says that the information came from Mysaria and her nickname throughout the city. So I was like, ooh, she done ratted you out.
I will say I was a little bothered by how fast it seemed like Alicent and Rhaenyra got together, which I understand were like a year after last episode. But we didn't get to see any kind of getting them agreeing with each other or anything like that, like discussion or anything. All we saw was last episode she was really mad at her, and now this episode all of a sudden they're sharing a park bench together, and it's kind of like we didn't get to see any of that development of them gaining their relationship back before we saw it getting kind of torn apart again. So I wish they would have delved into that just a little bit more and just given us a little bit more of this is why we're getting along again, or this is great that we're all gonna be friends again. And then later in the episode, Alicent was like, "You whore."
Well, I think that I do agree that it could have had much more screen time, but I think that a lot of that has to do with Viserys still being around, because in the book it's basically alluded to the fact that he works very hard to keep the peace between the two. He's kind of like the balance between their two pendulums a little bit, him being there. So I do believe that that does definitely start to dissolve, like when he is eventually out of the picture. But I agree, it could have gotten a little more screen time, but I think that the seeds are still being sown because Rhaenyra accidentally, made that snide remark about how romantic is it to be locked in a castle and forced to squeeze out heirs. And I was like, she used to be your best friend. Did you really not think about how that was going to affect her? Like, damn.
I know.
Rude.
And then the parallels between Rhaenyra off having fun in a brothel in Flea Bottom and Alicent just having to lay there with the king. And it was just kind of like, oh man, that was cringe on top of cringe in that scene right there.
No, I totally agree, because they have those juxtapositions and the different parallels done so well, because basically Rhaenyra is, I guess, first learning about that aspect of life, and Alicent is unfortunately very accustomed to that aspect of life, and one of them is having a fun time, or a somewhat fun time, and one of them is not having a good time whatsoever. But it's just there's just so many complications between these two characters, and they both lead such different lives, and you can see how that's really going to tear the fabric of their relationship throughout. So I think it's time that we get into like super spoiler territory. So what do you say we move on to our fire section?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's jump into it.
All right. So one of the things that we got to see was another High Council meeting, but now they're talking about Corlys and the Valerians potentially marrying into Braavos, or marrying one of their daughters off into the Free Cities. So what is that fear there? Why do they not want Braavos to be part of the Valerians?
Got you. That's actually a really good question. There is a lot of history between Valyria and the Free Cities. So I did a little bit of research to like brush up my memory, and the majority of the Free Cities are basically daughter cities of Valyria before the Doom. So they are obviously have some lineage there, and they are also a naval power. So we got to see how much trouble the Triarchy, which I think came from part of the Free Cities, is to Westeros when they choose to close off the Narrow Sea and, you know, crank down on trade, etc. So basically they're messing with a naval power. And the Free Cities also have a huge bearing on the political landscape of the time. So when you have them allied against Westeros, it's very dangerous, because they are such a they could mobilize against Westeros, basically, in so many words. And if you ally your biggest naval fleet in Westeros with the biggest naval fleet on the other side of the world, you now have no naval fleet to defend against an enormous incoming army. To give it like the too long didn't read of it is the fact that they're a huge naval and political power who also have history with Valyria. So it would be devastating if they lost their Valyrian fleet to the Free Cities, and that would just be the beginning of the end, basically, for being able to provide strength without having to use your dragons every time.
Okay, that makes sense, because we know Braavos as where Arya disappears to be part of the Faceless Men, but we never really understood that they have a lot of power behind them, or they used to. We don't have a lot of history behind Braavos, so
it's basically like they'd be kind of moving their vows of loyalty somewhat away from the Iron Throne. And if I have my information correct, I believe that the Free Cities also takes part to some degree in the Battle of the Gullet, which is one of the biggest naval battles that we're going to see in this. And I think when people see that episode, they'll see why it would have been such a horrible idea for the Valerians to be on that side. It would have just crushed so much of like the non-dragon flying section of Westeros' army. So, because, you know, it's this huge political power, it's this huge naval power. They have shared history with where the Targaryens came from. And they are capable of allying together, like the Free Cities can band together and attack in force. So it would just, you basically be losing your one divider and your one protection against a naval battle, basically. So it would be devastating.
I can see how it's kind of a chess move from Corlys Velaryon, and who knows if he would actually do it, if he's just sending word to say this is what's going to happen, just to make that chess piece move for Viserys to be like, okay, nope, just kidding, come back to us. And then he's going to have Rhaenyra marry his son Laenor, who we saw riding Sea Smoke last week. And then I personally want to see the Targaryens and the Velaryons marry, because I also really want to see the wedding. Like, it's going to be a big wedding. It's going to be a big to-do, and I am kind of excited to see the opulence of that.
It is going to be a huge ceremony, because you've got basically the ruling family of Westeros marrying into the richest family in Westeros. And you can tell just by the way the Velaryons walk in, they're coming in with some heat. Like, there is still some disdain between the Velaryons and the Targaryens. And the marriage between Laenor and Rhaenyra, politically, I think, does kind of tie those bonds back together, but I think it's in name only. And there's also other factors that kind of come into play. So it seems like every decision these characters make just causes more trouble for them down the road.
Well, that actually leads us really well into my next question for you, which is at the very end, after Rhaenyra's questionable decisions with Kristen Cole and Daemon. You see that the Maesters have made her some moon tea, is what they called it, and set it down for her to drink to potentially rid her body of something that she may not want. So we don't see her drink it. We see her look at it. Do you think she drank it, or do you think she'll be pregnant next episode?
You actually mentioned earlier to me that you've heard some, like, rumors that her firstborn child might have been Kristen Cole's. And like I said, they gloss over the intimate details in Fire and Blood. And I have always thought, okay, so, big spoiler, we're in the fire section, so brace yourselves, people. I always thought that all of her kids, until she married Daemon, were Harwin's kids. But now that, you know, we get a little bit more of the nuance of their situation, there is a strong possibility that one of them might be Kristen Cole's. But if that's the case, then she and Laenor need to get married fast. Very fast, because I don't know exactly how you're going to explain that if it takes you 3 months to arrange the wedding. And, you know, if you know, unfortunately, they do get pregnant their very first time doing it, you're just like, you need to have that wedding so fast.
That was a good callback. Also, if you think about it, to how, like, Ned Stark in season 1 of Game of Thrones is, you mentioned offline, the seed is strong.
Right.
That phrase, it goes back, and I read something today that was like, now we have to keep an eye on all the hair, right? So with Rhaenyra's kids, if she's married to Laenor, obviously they both have silver hair. And then if her kids come out and they have brown hair, it's going to be kind of obvious that it's not Laenor's.
Something is amiss.
Yeah, we got to start. Now we're on hair watch. We got to see, like, what her hair looks like.
Hashtag hair watch. I'm here for it.
Right.
And that becomes a huge point of contention for the succession, because everyone's arguing point is, you know, if Rhaenyra has no true-born sons, like if they're all, you know, Harwin's kids, and Rhaenyra and Harwin are not married, obviously, then there's no true-born heir to the throne. So why would you give the throne to someone who's got no true-born heirs to succeed them? And that kind of becomes like a swelling argument throughout the entire series. And I do love that it's a call forward to Ned Stark, where he noticed the difference between the Baratheon lineage and the Lannister lineage, because the Baratheons have, you know, dark hair, you know, brown or black hair. And then the seed is strong is something that's said throughout Fire and Blood, because it's a pun, because Harwin's last name is Strong, so it's a huge pun. And secondly, it's clearly like genetic proof that Rhaenyra is kind of doing some stuff outside of her marriage vows. So, and it becomes like a whole thing. But I don't want to get too far into spoiler territory for future episodes. So the only thing I'm going to say about Rhaenyra and Laenor's relationship is that I don't think Laenor minded personally very much that Rhaenyra had some side action, because there's a whole bunch of proof that Laenor was having some side stuff going on too.
Got it. And talking about like the Harwin nods, right? The seed is strong. That's hilarious. Are you enjoying all the Harwin nods that we're getting to see before he gets really into the scene of everything?
Thank you. I get to geek out about this for like 2 seconds. Okay, so there are very few couples in Fire and Blood that you can actually root for, because one, most of them are related, and that's just icky on all levels. Two, they may be relations between two terrible people who are both doing terrible things to everyone else and each other. But with Harwin and Rhaenyra, I was like, if I had to pick a couple that wasn't Corlys and Rhaenys as like a power couple, because they hold it down as a power couple, right? We're here for it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
if I had to pick like a second couple to be like, these two they could play, like we could give them some time of day, you know? So it would definitely be, in my opinion, as far as reading the books, without having seen it on screen yet, Harwin and Rhaenyra were always like, aww, in my opinion. So, and especially because it's a nod to the books when, you know, she's like running away from stealing something with Daemon, and she bumps into Harwin, and he's like, sup, you might not get so lucky next time, right? And then because I think in the books they say what happens is basically when Rhaenyra and Criston Cole have their falling out, which I'm unsure how it's going to happen on screen now. In the books, she approaches him and he turns her down, or he approaches her and she turns him down. Either way, there's hard feelings at some point. So, which there seem to be some lingering possible hard feelings now. So I'm interested to kind of see what's going to happen in the future with them. But she basically leaves Criston Cole and goes straight to Harwin. So Rhaenyra has a habit of rebounding. Rhaenyra has a rebound habit. So, but she goes straight to Harwin, and Harwin seems to be the one that stays around the longest, I think. Like, I mean, I think as far as I know, he fathers 3 of her children.
Yeah, is Harwin part of the Kingsguard right now?
I think he's part of the City Watch right now.
Okay, that makes more sense.
I think he does change positions because eventually Criston Cole changes positions, and so they have to kind of maneuver a little bit, and I think Harwin comes into a different position in the future. So he becomes, he's in a position where he can be closer to Rhaenyra more often, and, you know, vice versa, closer to his children more often. So I do enjoy the Harwin nods. Like, if I had to pick a couple that wasn't Corlys and Rhaenys as like a couple to support somewhat throughout the show, Harwin and Rhaenyra, they could probably hold it down. We'll see how it goes on the screen. We'll see, you know, what actually happens as far as they translate from page to screen. But I'm here for it. Like, I am here for Rhaenyra and Harwin, and I'm excited to kind of see how their relationship develops over time.
Yeah, I've been enjoying seeing them just with the knowing that there's going to be something in the future. I really like just the little tiny dialogues that they have so far.
Oh yeah, I agree. It's a really good setup, because it's like the first time she comes back all covered in blood, right? And he's like the only one who seems to be approving of said situation. Yeah. He's like, okay, all right, I got my eye on you. And then she's, you know, running or something, and she just so happens to run into Harwin, right? And I'm just like,
right.
First of all, you lucky as hell, because if it was any other City Watch, she'd have been in hella trouble. Anybody else would have ratted your ass out, right? Been like, you're out here where you're not supposed to be. So
Did he see Daemon behind her? Did he know that that's what was going on?
Well, Daemon, because Daemon is used to doing underhanded shit, is he had his hood down, so I don't think he knew it was Daemon. And obviously people found out it was Daemon later when he decided to let everyone in the entire room know exactly who they were. But I don't think Harwin knew. And it's not unheard of for, you know, the heirs to kind of be in the city. Like, you're not confined to the castle. It's not a prison. So it's not like she was running away from being locked in her room. It was just the scenarios that she went and got herself into once she got out of the castle.
It was the time of evening and like the location, and there was a lot more going into it.
Agreed. And they did have some really interesting lore they kept bringing out. Like, they brought up Jaehaerys and how Jaehaerys would have disinherited Rhaenyra if he found out. So Jaehaerys does have some history with one of his daughters was basically rebellious is not the right word, but one of his daughters was very flippant and made a lot of very bad choices and did not take her position seriously whatsoever. And eventually, I think Jaehaerys did like disinherit her, and he hated himself for it for the rest of his life, it was very, very sad because it was his daughter, and I think he sent her away because she just would not listen. She kept making like dangerous, questionable choices, and so that was like a really interesting nod to the parallel between some of the things that Jaehaerys went through in his fatherhood versus what Viserys is experiencing now with Rhaenyra. Because Rhaenyra she does have like a rebellious spirit, and you can kind of see that she's coming into making her own decisions, but because she's like very curious, she kind of has like it's not really a free spirit, but she is very curious about things that she hasn't really been exposed to. And so a lot of times what will happen in that situation is they'll get way too deep. And then it'll be like a dangerous situation instead of a safe situation. So I think Viserys just doesn't know what to do. And I think the best thing he could think of was to be like, okay, you're going to marry Laenor. We're going to make sure your name stays clean. No matter what you actually did, we're going to make sure it looks okay. And, you know, just do the whole sweep it under the rug thing, which we all know does not go well.
No. Ever. And I did appreciate the conversation between Rhaenyra and Viserys when she was like, if I were a guy doing this, nobody would care. And he's like, you're right, but you're not. You were born a woman, therefore people are going to care, and it's perception that matters. It's not what you actually do. And I thought that was a really powerful conversation, because I also appreciate it as a woman, that, yeah, gender bias is definitely a thing.
It definitely is. And I think that she really felt suffocated by the societal standards and like the norms at the time that she felt, you know, confined in it.
She can feel the weight of all of the past societal decisions and everything happening around her.
Yeah, and I think that she continues to rebel against that with her choice of partners moving forward, and with you know her children moving forward. I think that she continues to rebel against that. But from what I understand in my interpretation of Viserys is that he was really trying to protect her, because in the time period that Game of Thrones and House of Dragon is set in, it's not safe to be a woman in her position and make the choices, unfortunately, that she made. And she was trying to keep her safe. And I don't think that she really understood that, because, you know, it feels confining and it feels, you know, suffocating, which I totally understand. However, you know, it's dangerous to do that to yourself, do that to your position, and do that to your dreams when you want to inherit the Iron Throne. You do have to, you know, you're under certain pressures. And that's, unfortunately, that's what Rhaenys was trying to tell her. She's like, there's just some things, it's just how it is. And you have to find a way to maneuver inside it while also making your own decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's Daemon and Viserys were both kind of teaching her that in their separate ways of doing it.
I wish that Rhaenyra had been wise to Daemon's game. Because in his own way, you're right. He's trying to be like, you do have to care what the people think about you. And then he weaponized it and was like, I'm going to make them think something about you so that eventually we could be together.
Yeah.
It was sus. It was capital S-U-S. It was sus.
It was. And you mentioned her dreams, which actually puts us into a really good segue to get into our Dragon Dreams section, which is going to be our predictions for what the next episode is going to hold. So let's go ahead and get into that.
Okay, so we had the King of the Narrow Sea. In fact, I think that's the title of the episode, right? So we had that part. Daemon brought his crown, and we had the announcement for Rhaenyra and Laenor getting married. So we know the wedding is coming, and the reason I'm harping on this wedding so much is because it's like a timestamp, right? So it's a big piece in the middle of this season, and I'm assuming it's going to happen in the middle of this season. So, but I'm just ready to see it, because that's when stuff gets moving. Like, you know, this has been moving, but the actual like division and the dissension and the real drama between the two different factions starts at the tourney, you know, Viserys' 5th anniversary, where Alicent wears a green dress and Rhaenyra wears her red and black dress. We have yet to see that, and I've been looking for it. I've been keeping my eyes on the screen to see these dresses.
I know, but Alicent actually had a Targaryen collar dress on in this episode, and I appreciated that, knowing that later she's going to switch back over to the Old Town colors.
Yes, and I am interested to see what that's going to be like for her, especially because of her relationship with her father. You know, switching colors, you know, to represent her father's house after all that he's done. So I'm interested for like the interpersonal conflict. I don't know how far they're going to dive into that, but I am interested to see it. So we're still waiting on the wedding, whenever it's gonna happen. We're still waiting on the tourney, whenever it's gonna happen, because Rhaenyra getting married and the big tourney happening is what really decides the pacing for the rest of the season. So as much as I want to be able to predict what's going to happen next, they keep circumnavigating my expectations. They keep being like, you thought this big event was gonna happen, but really we're gonna lay the breadcrumbs for it to really matter and it to really be like as impactful as it's supposed to be. So I am looking forward to it. And I think I saw, okay, so when we set up these episodes and we're recording it, we find, we look up images that we can put next to us and we talk. And I was looking up images and I think I saw a cutaway of a trailer of Rhaenyra dancing with Laenor, and it looked like Kristen Cole's profile in like the foreground of the shot. So we're going to have to watch her and Laenor get married. And I can't tell exactly what his feelings for Rhaenyra are. I think they liked each other because they spent so much time together. But then you have this situation that's happened that has now jeopardized his position as a Kingsguard. And he said that being a Kingsguard is the highest honor that his house has ever experienced, or his name has ever experienced. And she jeopardized that. And he, did too, I think. So I'm interested to kind of see how his emotions toward her are going to change over the course of the timeline. Like, how soon will he start to resent her for what they did, Yeah,
he's definitely respecting her less and less as the series goes on.
And I think the look he gave her when she had to walk in to go talk to her father, he was like, uh-oh, this is bad for both of us. Like, this is bad for both of us. And in my head, I'm like, Rhaenyra, please don't rat him out. Please don't rat him out. Please don't rat him out. So it was just, I'm waiting for us to hit those big milestones. Because after Rhaenyra gets married, Daemon gets married to someone else. So we have yet to meet his lady in the Vale. We have yet to see her. We have heard about her.
I know.
But we haven't seen her. And I think she comes across some accident that leaves Daemon single again. So there's another marriage in the future.
Does she fall through the moon door?
No, possibly. It depends on how they decide to do it. I think she fell from her horse.
You gotta watch those moon doors.
You do. They just come out of nowhere and just be walking through the room and then boom. But I think that she, the threat that Sam Tarly's father gave him, and he's like, if you don't, disinherit yourself, Sam Tarly's dad was telling him in the original Game of Thrones series, if you don't disinherit yourself, I'll make sure that you come across an accident next time we go hunting. I think something of that sort happens to Daemon's lady in the Vale. And after that, he's like a free agent a little bit, so you can guarantee he's going to be making some moves that keep him as close to Rhaenyra as possible, and thus as close to the throne as possible, because they just circle each other constantly throughout the whole thing. So the motivations are muddy in this show, for sure.
A little bit, yeah. Can I just say that anybody who's sitting on the Iron Throne, can you just not go for a hunt? Can you just maybe not hunt?
It's not safe. It is not. It's like what's it called? Occupational hazard to go on a hunt while sitting in the Iron Throne, which brings me to the point of Viserys constantly being cut by this throne. We see all the scabs, and first of all, it's gotta hurt like no one's business. Secondly, it's just definitely like a definite red flag for what's gonna come up in the future. But before we totally, we jump out of this episode, I remember last week we were going to take a vote on who we thought would win between Daemon and Jon Snow. And Michelle, you mentioned that you were going to share with us your opinion. So I have been waiting all week to hear if you think Jon or Daemon's going to win in a fight.
So unfortunately, I think it's kind of obvious. I definitely think Daemon would win, only because Jon Snow is too honorable, and we know that thanks to Ned Stark. But Daemon's freaking dirty, man. He does some dirty shit, questionable shit. He's morally gray. Daemon would definitely win.
And I think that also because he's had more, I don't know if he's had more practice than Jon has. Jon has gotten himself into some situations. He's also killed some White Walkers. So, but I think he may have had more formal training, I think. Because Jon had training. He had more training than the other people at the Night's Watch had. Because, he got to train with a Master at Arms. But Daemon, I think, he had original battle experience. He's had more official training. Like you said, he does some dirty tactics. And I think he's just... Jon is stop at nothing for a different reason than Daemon is, in my opinion. There's different types of stop at nothing attitudes. And I think Damon's is a little more vicious than Jon's, which is not a bad thing. Like, it's just,
right.
they're different. And I feel like the nothing to lose would kind of get in the way, because Damon really doesn't have anything to lose except his own ambition. But Jon has always been very, very caring about his family. And I think we've all seen from, cinema and fiction everywhere that the person who really has nothing to lose is usually the most dangerous, because they don't give a fuck anymore. They're just like, fuck this. I'm gonna find any way possible to get rid of you.
Yeah, and he did have more formal training at Winterfell, obviously, but going up against all the guys in Castle Black who weren't nobly raised, didn't have the castles, and didn't have the formal training, he was better than them. But then his battle experience as you would go on into the series obviously gets a lot better, because he has to have his own battles, and he has to win them. Like Hardhome, to me, it's like one of the best episodes, but he actually did do really well in a battle sense at Hardhome. But yeah, Daemon is a little bit older, I think, than we know Jon Snow as at the point that we are at now. So if they were to meet like now, yeah, Daemon would definitely come out on top.
I agree. So let us know if that's what you guys thought in the comments, like if you thought Daemon was gonna win also. And so for this week, we really want to know if you guys think that Rhaenyra is going to be pregnant in the next episode, because Fire and Blood readers, I don't know if y'all were like me, but I legit thought that all of her first 3 children were Harwins. And so this opportunity of them to possibly be Kristens is a huge new thing in my brain. So let us know if you think Rhaenyra is going to be pregnant in the next episode, and what you think is going to happen after that point. I really want to know, because I've been waiting for these big event timestamps to tell me what's going to happen next, but they're giving us the breadcrumbs in the middle, and I'm totally here for it. I'm having a great time.
Right. And you bring up a really good point, though, about the wedding. So if she is pregnant, they would have very little time to plan this big, extravagant wedding. So I'm really curious about that.
We're going to be back every Tuesday on CouchSoup during season 1 to recap the latest episode of House of the Dragon and give you all the insights that we have from an avid show watcher who's read the original series, and from moi, who has read Fire and Blood and is still trying to figure out how they're going to move the middle pieces, like these pieces that are why they did the big events in Fire and Blood. I love getting into the why as we find out more about the what. Yeah, so you get early access if you're a member on CouchSoup on Tuesdays, and then the videos release and in podcast form on Wednesdays on YouTube. So go ahead and hit that like button. That helps us out. Let us know in the comments what lore you'd like us to dive into next. Let's see if we think Rhaenyra is going to be pregnant next episode or not. And we're going to see you next week with all the fire and soup.